My name is Ty Montague. I'm one of the co-founders and the chairman of a New York-based consultancy called Co-Collective. We help companies make the transition from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And we do that with established companies, but we also occasionally work with startups and help them just lay in a good foundation of purpose, action principles, like get them started on the right foot. And I've had the good fortune to work in both capacities with the gentleman seated to my left. So please give a round of applause for Patrik Frisk. Patrik has run publicly traded companies, but has decided to do a startup in the circularity space, and we're going to unpack all of that in due course. But I thought we'd start out showing you a short video that will give you a little bit of context about what Reju is taking on, what Reju is trying to accomplish.
Think of something you use every day, like your t-shirt. Now throw it away. Imagine 8.1 billion people doing the same thing. That's our textile system. It drains millions of tons of finite resources we need every day, all to make millions of tons of textile waste every year, and less than 1% gets recycled. The rest are buried or burned. At this rate, we'll need 2 planets to sustain us by 2030.
This is a very big problem.
This is Patrik Frisk, former executive to some of the world's biggest apparel brands. And now he's our CEO. Oh yeah, hi, we're Reju. We recover and sort textile waste before it becomes waste, regenerate it into materials that feel and function better than new, and work across the industry to recirculate them infinitely.
We're at scale with higher efficiency and speed than ever before.
No, you are not dreaming. But the thing is, there's no single solution to a problem this big. It takes time, money, and effort, new technology and new infrastructure, new regulations and new ways of working. Most importantly, it takes everyone: collectors, sorters, polymerizers, manufacturers, brands, consumers, and of course, you. It's challenging, but it's possible. See? Our regeneration hub is up and running in Frankfurt, Germany. The future is bright when we all do the work. Are you ready?
Okay, so that'll give you a sense of
Think of something you
what
use.
Patrik is up to at Reju. But before we get into that, Patrik, thanks for being here. I thought it would be good for you to just talk a little bit about your journey in the textile, fashion, and apparel business prior to Reju, just to give people context on the experience that you bring to a startup.
So thank you, Ty, and thank you everybody for being here today. We at Reju just love telling our story, and it's interesting at this point in my career to be doing this. I've had a 35-year career in textile, in both apparel, footwear, and accessories, and I started my career actually selling fabric with W.L. Gore & Associates. So I was a Gore-Tex salesman to begin with, and then since that time in the late 80s, early 90s, I've run, I think it is 16 or 17 brands in my career. And the latest brand that I ran before I started Reju was Under Armour, where I was the CEO. But I've also run brands like Timberland, North Face, Vans, Smartwool, also some brands over in Europe, Peak Performance and others. So have had an opportunity to do that with large brands, medium-sized brands, small brands. I've done it in footwear, apparel, in accessories. I've done it across sport, outdoor. I've done it in fashion. I ran the Aldo footwear company up in Montreal, one of the largest fast fashion footwear companies that you never heard of. And I've done it also in very many different places. So I've worked in 11 different countries and I've lived in 12. So I find myself here now at the end of that career, starting a new career. So the advantage of that, of course, is being well understanding, the space of textiles incredibly well. And I've had the opportunity since I started with fabrics also to actually go through and understand the full end-to-end need inside of the textile system.
Yeah, and as a CEO of various apparel companies, how aware were you of the problem of textile waste?
Well, it's interesting. I think the sustainability textile waste question was more a question of materials until very recently, quite frankly, and it began, I would say, in the 2011-2012 timeframe when we started to accelerate the use of plastic bottles and making regenerated or recycled polyester from it, and that really was a time, I think, where things started to change. The actual discussion around textile waste was not so big at that point in time. It was more a question of discussions around reuse and wearability and renewability versus actual waste per se.
Right. We worked together when you were at Under Armour, and it seemed like while you were at Under Armour, you really got kind of serious about sustainability.
Yeah, I think the industry really started to get very serious about it around 2015 when we had some really major targets being set. And then that accelerated through the entire, I would say, COP process, global fashion agenda, and many different initiatives in the industry where people started to put targets out there, right? Set targets where we're going to be having this amount of recycled content in our clothing. We're going to go and have this much organic cotton, and et cetera, et cetera. And that accelerated to a point where in around 2017, 2018 at Under Armour, we were making about 70% of all of our material for our apparel was actually made out of polyester. And we were making a lot of it from recycled polyester, from bottles. And we saw that was not sustainable, and we realized that we had to find other ways.
Right. So just for context, for folks in the audience, how big a problem is this? You may all be experts. You might be at different levels of knowledge and understanding around this. How big is this problem? I've heard you use the phrase, the sausage is full. What do you mean by that?
Well, the sausage is full. I think it's an interesting thing, right? When we talk about numbers in this of this magnitude, and just to give you an example, so in 2000 we made about 53 million tons of textile in the world. In 2023 we made 124 million tons. We throw away about 87% of that or burn it. Most of it is thrown away. Actually, a very small part is being burned. So now you start to think about, wow, that's a lot. Yeah, and we've been doing it for quite some time. And the world has evolved and changed during that time. Landfills and landfill space is hard to come by. 57% of the content in that textile is going to be polyester, which does not disintegrate in the ground. It also gives out a lot of other bad stuff, microplastics and other things. So when you start to think about that from an aggregated perspective, and perhaps your question was when you start to realize, one of the things that we started to realize was the amount that's already out there. I mean, today we have about 6 generations worth of apparel circulating. When you start to think about putting 87% of 124 million tons into the ground, and some of that's going to be burned. So let's take a haircut there. Let's say 100 million tons. That's like putting 90 million cars into the ground every year. It's like not sustainable, right? So it's not a sustainable approach because landfills space is also precious. And we need to find a different way to do this. And of course, when you think about things like polyester, you're actually taking a finite resource and doing it with as well, right? So we can all debate peak oil, when is it going to finish, how much is left, but the reality is it will finish at some point, right? And to go through these massive infrastructure changes that we need to do to make this happen, it's going to take a generation or maybe two. It took us about 3 generations to get to where we are right now. You know, polyester, for example, is a very new phenomenon, right, in the textile world. It really started as an industrial product for textile in the late 50s, early 60s. And has accelerated more or less ever since. So it is a new phenomenon. It's taken us a couple of 3 generations to get to where we are. It's going to take about the same, actually, to get us into a better place in terms of how we use this.
Okay, let's pivot to Reju, because I'm sure when you left Under Armour, you could have taken another big job running a publicly traded company. What is it that made you decide to do a startup?
Well, my old partner, so what happened with this technology that we have at Reju today, which actually originated from IBM, and I saw, by the way, that Arvind Krishna is going to be here and do a talk on AI later in the week, so I recommend you don't miss that, because he's a fantastic person and really has foresight in that area as well. But IBM had developed this technology that they saw had potential for textile to textile, or I should say polyester recycling. And they turned first to a company called Technip Energies in France, which is one of the foremost engineering companies in the world. They build very large things in terms of natural gas, green blue hydrogen, carbon capture, and things like that. But they also do polymerization, and their technology sits in about 1,000 polyester plants around the world. So they're experts in actually polymerizing polyester. So they said, we need somebody to partner with us to be able to build this out. At Under Armour, as I told you before, we were in the situation of looking at how should we think about, our journey here as it relates to recycled product going forward. And we were invited by IBM and Technip to be part of a small startup joint venture to explore whether this technology that back in 2019 when we started talking to each other was actually still, let's say, at the incubate stage in the IBM labs in California. So we were very excited about this at Under Armour. So we actually joined forces with these 2 companies, and we created a joint venture, and we moved the technology to Frankfurt, Germany, where Technip had all of its chemical engineering capability. And at that point, the idea was to actually build what you saw here on the screen, what we call now the Regeneration Hub 0, to really scale the technology as fast as possible. When I left Under Armour did not want to pursue that. They wanted to have the output of what was going to be made, but their business is not to be building factories. Technip and IBM asked me whether I would be prepared to take a look at the opportunity for commercialization. How big is the effort? What is the effort needed? I was lucky enough to get the resources, a number of different teams from IBM, from Technip, also from Bain & Company outside help, and also others like yourself, Ty, helping out to really look across the entire landscape. And what's interesting is, Technip has all of this knowledge in chemical engineering. So they had already scoped all of the technologies that were out there in the world in terms of what could be done. And what we managed to do was to convince them that one of the biggest problems that's not being really addressed is post-consumer textiles. And so we started our entire thought track by saying, we're going to attack the biggest problem first, and that is post-consumer textiles. Nobody else has the technology today that can take all of this mix that we've created over the last decennium, 3, 4, 5 decennium back, 40, 50 years, and actually take it apart, make sure that we valorize what we take apart. So we take the polyester, we can depolymerize that. We take the cotton, recycle it, which is a byproduct, and we give that to the people that can recycle that. We take the elastan, we take the dye. We actually try to get to, or as close to, a zero waste proposition as possible. So that's really what happened when I left Under Armour. And what I saw when we did all that work was that I needed to go do this. Right. I needed to give back, basically. It's simple as that. There's no other thing to talk about here. That's really why I did it. Was I've had a fantastic career. I've run some of the most amazing brands, met some of the most amazing people, and of course I could go into the sunset and just do fun things. But I don't think I could have lived with myself without at least giving it a good go. So here we are. Here we are.
We're glad you're taking it on. So you have better technology, but you also have competitors in the space. There are companies like Circ and others. Can you just explain a little bit why Reju technology is a better answer?
Well, first of all, competitors, we actually, I hope all of them are successful. And I tell you why, because when we look at our numbers and we look 10 years out, 2034, 2035, the demand for this kind of product is going to be very large. Today, about 13% of all the polyester that's made out there is made from recycled bottles. And as you might imagine, that's not a sustainable path, right, going forward, because the bottling industry is going to need their bottles, and the textile industry actually needs to take care of their own problem. So at some point, this thing needs to pivot. So if you could imagine, 10, 11 years out, the demand being just a small part of what's being recycled bottles today, and you took all of the competitors you just talked about, the Circs of this world, the Cyrus, the Amber Cycles, and all of them, and you added it all up in terms of what they've said they will do by then, including ourselves, you're going to get to a very, very small number. So actually, it is actually very important that all my competitors succeed. Now, there are some challenges with that, and I can say that because we understand technology very well and chemistry very well, and where I'm, in our company. And everything has a challenge when it comes to chemistry. But one of the things that's important for you to be able to do when you want to industrialize, and make no mistake, Reju is here to industrialize this. We are going to scale this. So, and we've been very public about this, by the way, since we're owned 100% by Technip Energies these days. We were partaking in their Capital Markets Day in London in November and stated clearly what our targets were. And that's important because you need scale to be able to make this industry evolve, right? That's really, really key. If you can only do a little, the likelihood of this happening is going to be very small. There's a very good analogy right now happening in the electric car business, right? Early on, a few people buy cars, but it took a very long time to get anywhere. We're hoping it's going to go a little quicker here. But the technologies are different. So essentially, when you look at the recycling of polyester specifically, you have essentially 3 different technologies. You have something called methanolysis, where you use methanol, hydrolysis, where you use water, and glycolysis, where you use glycol. That's the chemical track. You also have mechanical, of course. Now, the problem with trying to do apparel mechanically is that you can't break down the chemistry by doing it mechanically. You have to use chemistry to do that. And what's unique about what we can do at Reju is we are using glycolysis, which is one of these 3 paths that you can take, but we also have something called a catalyst, and that is what was invented by IBM, and that enables us to do this quicker, with less energy, and with a higher yield. All those things are critical to be able to go to scale, and that's also one of the reasons why, personally, I joined this project, is because once you have that, you also need to be able to actually execute on it. So it's actually instrumental that you also understand the chemical engineering that's needed, and also building the actual equipment to be able to do all of this, right? Which we also do, and then build, the actual building. And in the case of what you saw with Regeneration Hub Zero in Frankfurt, just imagine this, the Reju is 18 months old, right? We started building that building that you saw, Regeneration Hub Zero, on the first day that we opened our company, and we finished it in 11 months. That's a 1,000-ton demo plant. And in this industry, normally, it takes half a decade or so to get to that kind of point. So for us, the technology is important. It's also important from a carbon emissions perspective.
I was just going to ask about that, because if it's lower energy, then presumably it's lower carbon footprint.
Exactly. So the way that this is normally depicted today is through what's called an LCA, or life cycle analysis. And a life cycle analysis is important because it gives you an indication of how efficient what you do is as it relates to carbon emissions. We decided to not do that ourselves because we wanted to truly do this from an outside-in perspective. So we had Deloitte work for 6 months and actually go from what we would like to call cradle to gate. So we actually started from the oil well on the one side to 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds of polyester, from textile waste to 1 kilo, 2.2 pounds of polyester. And we measured how much more efficient we were in that cycle, because that's actually what we're going to be compared to. And we were 50% less carbon emissions in that. So that's a starting point for us. And what's important to understand there is that that's everything, right? That's from aggregating the waste, sorting the waste, preparing the waste, doing the chemistry, and repolymerizing, which is the final step that you need to do, back into something that can be used for yarns, for example, and fabric. So all the transport, all the things that you need to do there is included. Now, when you do these life cycle analysis, it's important to understand that you have to make a lot of assumptions, because of course we haven't built the full-scale regeneration hub yet. So anybody that does this today does it based on assumptions, because there are very few hubs or plants built. The difference between what we do and others do is that we do that using what's called a process book, because we're an engineering company. So before you build anything as an engineering company, you need to have a process book. In other words, you determine all the things you're going to do in the factory that you build, and then you build according to that. That also gives you an opportunity when you do an LCA to be very much more specific. So we feel very, very confident in our numbers. And again, they're audited and they're third-party made. So
Okay. Well, so that brings us to our friend the elephant. Some of you may wonder why there's an elephant at the front of the room. That is the elephant in the room that we're going to talk about next, which is you've got this great technology, you've built a pilot, fingers crossed, everything is going well. What is the barrier to scaling this technology?
So the barrier, there are actually numerous barriers. The technology is important, and that's actually what we find ourselves speaking the most about. But it isn't anything but a key. And why is that? Well, what we're competing against is a linear model that has been perfected over all those years that I talked about, since the 50s and 60s. We take oil out of the ground and we actually free ride on all of the pipes that have been built for many different things, all the way to the polymerization factory. We polymerize at very, very, very large volumes, and then we make it into yarn and fabric. All of that's been perfected over time. What we now are faced with is a new raw material, textile waste. Today, this is going to blow your mind, okay? And it's what keeps me up at night. Textile waste today, apart from what's happening in the non-for-profit world, and also with some brands certainly trying to do this in their own circular way, is not aggregated at scale anywhere. Anywhere. And what's even more challenging is that whatever apparel that is being aggregated is sorted by hand. So 99.9% of all apparel that's aggregated today, more or less, is sorted by hand. Why is that? Because we're only sorting for style or wearability, right? Because that is the value. That has value, so that's what we do today. Now, I don't need that. What I need sorting for fiber. That is a whole different ballgame with totally different types of volumes. So right now with Reju, we're building we're going into what's called financial investment decision for 2 very large regeneration hubs, one in Europe and one in the US, 50,000 ton. So for me to get 50,000 ton out of a regeneration hub, I need to put in about 60,000 tons. and I need to be sorting through about 240 to 250,000 tons of textile waste. So if you're going to do that by hand, let me tell you, you're going to be sorting for a while. I'm building 2. That means 500,000 tons. Okay, 500,000 tons is a quarter of all the textile that's currently circulating in Germany today. So it's incredibly important to understand that you need to get actually serious about aggregating the waste in the right way, sorting the waste for fiber with at least semi-automatic conveyor belts, optical reading, and infrared, and all the tools that are actually available today. And then when you have them in your big pile, you got to take out all of the disruptors, right? The zippers and the buttons to get ready to put it into the recycling plant or the regeneration hub. None of those steps exist today.
Yeah, so another way to think about it is if you are, as I think about your description of the problem, like you're trying to take the linear system and bend it around in order to join the two ends so that you're collecting, instead of throwing stuff into a landfill, you're collecting that stuff and putting it through the front of your factory. But you have to build, there's like a missing slice there.
Yeah, we call it the cheesecake.
The cheesecake, you got to build that.
And that's the elephant in the room. So the elephant in the room is the fact that everything today is actually isolated. There isn't an opportunity to go circular unless you build this new infrastructure of the future. So what you need to do is you need to partner, like we've done here in the US with Waste Management and Goodwill. Very unusual, right? Big public company, biggest non-for-profit in the world that deals with textiles, and actually start to think about how do we aggregate waste? How do we sort waste at scale for the future? Really, really key. Then we have to build these places where we take away the disruptors. And then we have to build these large regeneration hubs. All of that is the missing cheesecake slice in the circularity that today does not exist. So you're talking about hurdles. So what we did at Reju from day number 1 is we actually said, okay, well, we're not going to go into this unless we can actually get the capability and capacity to do all of that. So our owner, our mother company, Technip Energies, said it's worth it because we have to do this because we know we can do it. And so we're fortunate as a company not having private equity and that kind of a setup where we're actually owned by one of the largest engineering companies in the world. We can actually take the pain, I would say, to address all the hurdles. But one thing we cannot do, right, is we cannot always go as fast as we would like because we are dependent on so many other players in that chain.
Right. So you're actually, in a way, you're not a technology company. You're an ecosystem company. You are literally building a new collaborative ecosystem to achieve circularity. Yeah, that's super inspiring. What, do you have, where are you in terms of getting customers? Do you have anybody signed up? Like, how is the business development going?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, we spent the first, first part of our journey not focusing on that at all, actually, because we realized that it doesn't matter how many customers you have if you got nothing to give them. So we've spent the majority of our time actually setting up our infrastructure upstream, in terms of aggregation, sorting, and so we have spent a lot of time doing that. We now have more than 15 different companies, some of them very, very large, that are engaged on the front end to make sure that when we build these very large units, we can actually feed them. We're going to be competing against oil tankers, right? Pulling up into port and getting a hose out. I have to make sure that when I build one of these things that costs about $300 million for one, I'm going to build 2. I have to make sure that 24/7, 365, there's stuff coming in, and the right stuff's got to come in, right? So that's absolutely essential. The offtake part of that is something that we are feeling very comfortable about because we have talked to basically the whole industry. We come from the industry, so we have our entire team that deals with business development is from the industry. So we know the industry, we know the players, we know how to integrate what we do and prepare our customer for integration of the product that comes out. So I think that's the other really important thing. We understand the go-to-market of our customer, which also is a little bit unique to what Reju does.
Yeah. Quick time check. Sorry, where are we in time and space? Because I want to. What I should have said at the beginning, if I were a real host, I would have told you that we were going to do Q&A. So be thinking of your questions if you have them. I want to leave enough time. And 30 minutes. Okay, so we're fine. Okay, so you've actually. In building this ecosystem, you've done something that I think is really interesting. You have created something called the Reju Circular Textile System Charter. Can you talk just a little bit about that document? Because you're not just essentially, as I understand it, you're not just saying to customers like, "Hey, we've got polyester for sale. Do you want to buy some?" Yeah. It comes with strings attached. Right? You're actually trying to change aspects of the industry.
Yeah, we would like to at least give the industry a chance to do that, right? So this is where I get really passionate. Because, like I said, I've been in this industry my whole life, and what an opportunity to actually think differently about how we think about recycling or regeneration, right? So what if you could actually do what we're attempting to do and come out with something better at the other end? Why does recycling or regeneration have to somehow have this kind of stigma of being not as good as second time around, or we actually know that what we do, we're in the molecule business, right? So when we take the polyester out and we break it down into what's called BHET, which is a monomer, the last step before you polymerize, you can think about it as a washing machine, basically, right? So that molecule in that fabric that we have just disentangled is actually damaged. Why is it damaged? Because it's gone through hell, right? It's been heated up, it's been infused with chemicals, it's been damaged, been beaten up. We take it back and we actually kind of purify it. And we get something that's very, very pure or clean, you could say, with very little impurities. That gives us an opportunity that when we make it back into polyester, we can make really good polyester. And it's really interesting in our industry of textile that we call it, when it comes from oil, we call it virgin polyester. This sounds so nice, right? Virgin polyester. That's like, wow, that's like an ice cream or something. The reality is there's no such thing as virgin polyester, right? I mean, the polyester comes from a lot of different sources. It's engineered into different qualities. You can have good polyester, not so good polyester. And if you have recycled polyester from bottles, you actually have a problem, right? Because you have a lot of impurities, because you basically just melt the bottle and you extrude it again. So what we do, though, is we take that polyester and we make it into this powder called BHET. And then we have this opportunity, because we're the masters of the universe when it comes to polymerization, to make really good quality polyester. So now we're handing this back to our customer, and that's what we sell, Reju polyester. So what are they going to do with it? What would you have them do with it? Just take it and make it into the same bad old stuff again? I think that's a huge missed opportunity. So our charter is about, first of all, explaining how this world of regeneration works so that everybody is on the same page. And then it's about suggesting how we can actually make a better product. Because is this going to cost more? Of course it's going to cost more. To try to back away from saying that this is going to cost more is ridiculous. But more cost is something that the textile industry has had to deal with forever, and is dealing with on a daily basis today, right? And they're called tariffs, for example. But there, of course, material changes. Cotton goes up and down. Virgin polyester goes up and down. Recycled polyester. Material cost is something that is always going to be there in terms of cost. To build a new infrastructure system is going to cost something. So there needs to be an investment into this. But what's really great, and what is an opportunity, is if you take this opportunity of having this very good product, you can also build something better for the end consumer. Because I think, having been in this business for a long time, it's absolutely clear to me, and I know it very well, the consumer is not necessarily prepared to pay, at least not all consumers, prepared to pay for green, right? It's just not going to happen. But they are prepared to pay for something better. And believe me, I've spent enough time with great brands knowing that that is true. So what if we make a better fiber? What if we make a better yarn? What if we make a better fabric and better product? Can we charge a little bit more to compensate? Yes, I believe so. And why do I think that? Well, because I just told you that this is going to scale over a very, very long period of time. So if you're a large company, Ty, that becomes one of our customers, and you're going to initiate, doing business with us over the next decade or two, before we can meet the demand that you will have, it's going to take over a decade. So there should be no problem to grow into this if you have the real intent of being part of this and wanting to do it. So the charter is there to show how this can be done. The charter is there to explain what this is all about. It's there to show where the gaps are, but it's also a positive document. It's a positive document to show how we can get from here to there.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to pivot because you brought up the consumer willingness to pay for green products, and there's a related area that I want to get into, which is, this is actually going to be a couple of questions at once, but we're obviously in the middle of a backlash against ESG and so-called woke capitalism, and the current administration is in the middle, in the U.S., and you're a global business, so this is only partially something you have to worry about. But in the U.S., obviously, we've put the car in reverse, and we're unraveling a bunch of regulations, and there's just a real sea change, particularly here. And Reju has been a purpose-led business from the very beginning, and you are a pending B Corp. And so I just wanted to open that topic up and say, becoming a B Corp takes a lot of effort. We actually at Co just got certified ourselves, and it's hard. And what value do you see in going through that process and doing that work, especially in the environment that we're in right now?
Well, I think you have to look beyond the current environment, right? First of all, I come back to the duration of how long we're going to be doing this, right? And listen, we have one Earth. It's very simple. It's smart business to me, right? So why did we set out to become a B Corp from day number one? Well, because we knew that was a high standard. So much better to begin, right, your journey at the right place, right? So very, very simple. But purpose-led, I think, is absolutely essential when you are working with something like we do. But I think in general, for any company today, you got to do the work to understand why you exist, right? And we exist to unlock infinite possibilities within finite materials. That's our purpose as a company. We have a vision of a world designed to last. Would you like to work for a company like that? I think so, right? So for me, it is incredibly important. And I think what's even more encouraging and exciting is we're doing this inside one of the largest engineering companies in the world. And they're excited about it. So, is it possible? Yes, it's possible. And I think you have to just look beyond. I mean, if you get caught up, and listen, I was just 2 days in Washington. I was at the American Apparel and Footwear Association meeting, and yesterday I had the chance to interact with politicians and many people there. And at the end of the day, right, we're in this for the long game. If you're in this for the long game, you got to play the long game, and that's what we're doing. So for me, whatever you call it, we got to take care of what we're doing, right? We got to take care of our waste. We got to make sure we don't use up all our finite materials. We got to make sure we put things back into circulation again. We got to have to work at it. Consumer has to work at it. Companies have to work at it. Yeah, of course. I mean, otherwise there'll be nothing left, and that's not a good place, right? So I think it's I think anybody that is a smart business person today is definitely thinking about this in the right way, what they call it in the end. Yeah, you know, I think that comes and goes, but I think at the end of the day, you got to do the right thing here.
The Business of Fashion recently ran an article entitled, "Does Anyone Still Care About Sustainable Fashion?" And I wondered if I could get a show of hands. Does anybody here care about sustainable fashion? It's a little bit of a layup because we're in a circularity discussion, but I care. Like, I hate seeing headlines like that. That's just, kind of bad vibes. But, and you asserted that you have a question about whether consumers care. Like some consumers must care.
Many consumers care.
Yeah.
Many consumers care. Now, our job is to make it as easy as possible for them, right?
Right.
The choice has got to be as easy as possible. So I
Yeah.
think that's important.
People aren't willing to do a lot of work,
No.
right?
No.
Understandably, I guess.
And that's the way it is. So just realize that, right? And make sure you address that in your business model. I think the other thing is we call ourselves radical pragmatists. So that's not activist. It is radical in the way that if you're going to untangle what's out there today, right? This linear model that we've had for so long that works so well, that's so efficient, so cost efficient. You have to find radical new ways of doing it. And I go back to the example that I told you a little while ago about how we actually brought waste management and goodwill together. We did that before we were even a company because we said it makes sense. Waste Management's largest waste management company in the United States. You collect more trash than anybody else. 80% of all textiles in the United States today go out in the general trash. We got to address that. Goodwill. You're the best of getting the cream out of textile waste. And we're going to take everything that's at the bottom that nobody can use, we take that. That's a sustainable
makes
model,
sense,
and I think
right,
it just
it
makes a lot of
works.
sense, right?
Agreed.
Does it make sense?
It makes sense to me.
So,
it makes sense to me.
Radical new ways of working, and don't be afraid to do the hard work. I think that's important.
So kind of a related question, because we've been kind of touching, tapping around this. Right now, you're, by necessity, you are a B2B brand. Do you see Reju becoming a B2C brand, like a business, a consumer-facing brand?
Yes, 100%. And how do I think about that? Well, first of all, that's one other thing that we did from day number one. We became a brand from day number one. We declared that we're a brand. And why is that important? We think it's important because we need a platform for things like this. But also, ultimately, we can actually help, we believe, inform the consumer that we talked about before. For example, when we're building these regeneration hubs, we're building them to be educational places, demystifying chemical recycling. We're opening them up to universities, we're opening up to schools, to the general public. Why? Well, because we are absolutely, we have an absolute intent to share this journey with the general public. So if you are a brand, it just becomes easier to tell your story, but it also forces your organization to be disciplined. One of the interesting things about brands, and I've run a lot of brands in my day, is that the most successful brands are the most disciplined brands. You have to decide what you're not. You have to decide what you are. You have to decide on your direction. For us, it's also a way to make sure that we stay the course. So it is a great compass for us, but it's also a great platform to use. So it makes us very effective in terms of how we think about going beyond the B2B space.
Excellent. Okay. Where are we in time and space? Okay. Excellent. Sticking the landing here. I'd like to open it up to folks in the audience. I hope you've saved up a few questions. If so, you can go up to that mic there or just shout it out. Yeah.
Shout it out?
Go, yeah, go.
When you said that when you recycle the polyester, it becomes a polymerase, then you use that polymerase
That's a great question. A couple of different things. First of all, one of the beautiful things about what we do as well as it relates to the process is we take out all of the bad chemicals before we break it down into what's called the monomer. So all the PFAS, all the bad things that were there, and that's really important to understand. When you try to aggregate post-consumer waste at scale, 250, 500,000 tons, you're going to get a lot of bad stuff. You're going to get stuff that's 40 years old, 50 years old. So you're going to get all of the stuff that we've ever made. So you need to have a chemistry and an ability to take all of that bad stuff out. So when you then have it down into the monomer, you make it back into polyester again, to Reju polyester, and you're going to make fiber and yarn out of it. What determines how much shedding you're going to have is actually the kind of fiber and yarn you're going to make. So this is one of the suggestions in the charter is, why don't we make sure that we minimize, right, the shedding by making the right type of yarn the next time around? Because I think there's one thing we also should make clear here. The textile industry is not going to walk away from polyester. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 50 years. Why? Because there is no better fiber. There is no better material for textile. It's highly versatile. It's lightweight. It has wicking properties. It's durable. It's made in thousands of factories across the world. It's not going to change. So what we got to do is make better product. And so a lot of it is about the textile engineering at the end of it. And that's what we're trying to discuss with our customers, to say, why don't you just make better yarns? And it's possible. It's very hard to get rid of it altogether, but it's very possible to minimize it. So that's the intent that we have.
You have quality tests?
Yes, this is absolutely possible to do. Yes.
So I'm a communications journalist, so a lot of what I'm doing is trying to talk to people about the things they're doing and translating it into, understandable language. I'm really impressed with your ability to do that, and I'm curious, what was that journey like of trying to, you mentioned wanting to make a platform. So where did you get the wherewithal to know that that was an important part of it? Because I see that overlooked everywhere.
Yeah, I'm not good at a lot of stuff, but there's, so I always tell my team, when you explain something to me, you have to talk like you're talking to a 7-year-old, right? So I draw very big pictures on whiteboards because, you know what I mean? It's like, so I think this is a very complex thing. I've tried to be as brief as I could here today. You can then imagine, most of you here, I'm sure, are fairly knowledgeable about this stuff. If you take it out to outside of this room, so to speak, you have to be very clear about it. So this is a reason for why we believe that it was important to first create the brand, but then we've also now decided to create the charter. So the charter for us becomes like our sustainability report. So we publish it every year. We're going to publish it now in early May, the first one. And it's a point of view, you could say, but it's also trying to really make sense out of all of this. So you could read it like a narrative, but there are also recommendations in there, and we take a very clear point of view on how we believe not just the industry, but also regulation needs to play out for this to be possible. Because that's a big danger right now, right? You look at all of the extended producer responsibility discussions that are going on. Many different versions are being, discussed. For these things to really work, right, they need to be coordinated. There needs to be a framework, and they need to be coordinated. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, going forward. But in terms of Reju, the platform is there to facilitate the narrative. Thank you. Yep.
What else?
Yeah. So today, what happens when we have in our process, we take the polyester, because we're focused on the polyester, right? The other waste that is waste isn't actually all waste, right? Because, for example, the second largest component that we have is cotton. So the average composition of textile post-consumer waste today is 70-30, roughly. 70% polyester, 30% cotton. So by definition, your second largest is going to be cotton. Cotton, when we get it out of our process, is a recyclate. It's perfect for the Renewcells of this world, or Spinnovas, or people that are focused on recycling cotton. So we're going to feed that into that pipe. We're working on 2 other streams right now. Elastane. Elastane or spandex, and the stretch component that we have in almost every garment today. Nasty, nasty stuff. It's like chewing gum, right, in the chemical processes. We have the opportunity with our technology to take that out, and there's actually an opportunity to recycle that as well. The limitation with that is it's very small volumes. So that's one consideration, but it's possible to take it back. You have the same thing with dyes. Dyes is something incredibly valuable. About 3 to 5% of garments contain dyes. We believe it's possible to also recycle dyes. We're going to attack that. Then you have the poison, the really bad stuff, the PFAS and the chemicals that cannot be reused. Today, there's only one avenue for that. It's burnt. That's what happens to it. We're not allowed to do anything else with it. So what happens today, if you have a factory in Germany, a factory in the US, or anywhere in the world, and you have PFAS, you have to burn it. So what we're trying to make sure that we do when this is going to be live, so to speak, is to burn it in the right place. That is the important thing. You got to make sure you put it and you burn it in the right place. But those volumes are incredibly small in the big scheme of things. So, our core idea is valorize almost everything, and only the stuff that you have to, by law, right? It's a law that you have to get rid of it. You're not allowed to do anything with it. So we're limited in that arena. Yep.
So actually, I'm from Munich, Germany, and we have a lot of discussions at the moment about the circularity paradox also in the German automotive sector. So, and you said a lot that you really think about like how important it is to have a community ecosystem to do collaboration there. So, and I know that companies like, for example, BMW, they have the same issue with with e-mobility, with the batteries. So they also think, how can we solve it? So my question is, do you also have discussions with companies in the same situation, but from totally different branches like automotive?
Yes, we do. We're also talking to the automotive world for their polyester. One of the things that we tend to forget, we think about polyester in clothing, but the seat that you're sitting on right now has polyester. The carpet here has polyester.
Furniture, mattresses.
Mattresses. I mean, it's everywhere. So all the large furniture companies, mattress companies, we're also talking to them. But we see similarities, right? In the battery business is a perfect example. But you also see it in the bottling industry. Bottles are made out of polyester. Today, they are now actually coming under regulation. So in Europe, for example, 25% of your content in a plastic bottle has to be recycled content. So you can imagine if you're a bottler and you have to use recycled content, and you have the textile world taking your recycled content, putting it into a garment that you're then throwing away. I don't know. I think there's going to be some discussions down the line, but we're certainly talking also to that industry, making sure that we are coordinating, and a lot to learn from that industry for sure as well. And there are other examples as well in terms of paper, in terms of aluminum, and that's where big companies like Waste Management, for example, or helpful, or Suez or Veolia or Remondis, for example, in Germany. Because they have very great experience in handling other types of circularity efforts. Yep.
What are some anticipated challenges that you find with the customers that you're going to sell materials afterwards, and them plugging that into their current linear model?
That's a great question, because one of the challenges is actually that the history of recycled polyester isn't good. So when I've been around long enough to remember when we first introduced recycled polyester into the supply chains of the brands, it was a disaster. Why? Because, like I said, you take a bottle and you melt it, right? And then you extrude fiber and yarn from it. You have a lot of impurities. When we put that into the spinnerets and started making fiber and yarn, it actually broke very easily, for example. So you had all of these downtimes. It was very, very hard. Today, the industry has calibrated for those impurities, and you mix it up with virgin and all sorts of things to make it better. So what the industry is asking me now is to say, okay, so you're telling me your stuff is really good. Show me. So, this is always the case where you have to actually go through a process with all of these brands, all of their supply chain, to make sure that you can deliver a quality that is high consistently. And that is a process you just have to go through. We are benefiting from the fact that we are from the textile industry, so we have some of the best textile engineers in the world working at Reju with the supply chains of the brands to make sure that we will calibrate and to make sure that when that day comes, when we start to ramp up, we're ready to go.
I think that might be the other elephant in the room too, is once you have that product, are other businesses ready to take that and plug that into their system?
Not necessarily. You got to prepare that too. In the same way you're preparing upstream, you got to prepare downstream. So it's a full end-to-end from the moment it's textile aggregated waste until you re-enter into the supply chain of the brand. We got to do all that hard work.
What is life without challenge, really?
And just imagine, I could be skiing, I could be golfing, I could be doing fun stuff. I love this stuff. I love this stuff.
Crazy man. Anybody else?
Is that it? One more?
That polymers can be used to do others, like you said, objects, other stuff can be done with the polymers that came from the textile.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we can do all of the things that's done in polyester recycling today, right? So we could do bottles, we could do packaging, we could do, we could do all those things. The polyester that we make is a great quality polyester. So you could take that polyester that comes out of my place and make everything that you make out of polyester today: carpets, mattresses, little bags, whatever you would like. But that's not, the solution for that already exists, right? So for us, we're trying to solve one of the biggest problems we have in the world today when it comes to waste. And also one of the biggest problems we have when it comes to carbon emissions, right? So 10% of all carbon emissions in the world comes out of the textile industry, okay? Now you think about the fact that what I can do is I can do infinitely. So I can do my process 1 million times. And every time you get a 50% reduction in carbon emissions. I think that's a pretty smart way to think about how to reutilize our resources in the world. So I'm going to be, yeah, go ahead.
Similar to the organic symbol, do you have a symbol that will allow consumers and customers to know that the polymer being used is made out of material that's specifically manufactured?
Do you think that would be helpful? Okay, so I think this is a really interesting question, right? So I started my career with Gore-Tex, so I have some experience with this, and there's certainly an Intel Inside Gore-Tex opportunity here. The question becomes, how do you do that? And luckily, we have a little bit of time before we become commercial in a few years here. So we have time to try to figure that out. But that's definitely something that, if it can be beneficial to the process, to the consumer, and it can help our brands, our partners, yes, I think that's not a bad idea. I just think it has to be additive, right? It has to add value somehow in a meaningful way.
So Patrik, last question, because we're out of time. If I'm a brand or another player in this ecosystem, a journalist or whomever, how do I get in touch with Reju?
Well, you just go into our well, you can either look us up on LinkedIn, but you can also go onto our homepage, and we respond to anybody reaching out there as well.
Okay.
But I thank you all for listening to us today. I hope it's a little bit clearer what's going on out there in the textile recycling world, and please reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah, and thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everybody. Have a great South by Southwest.